We're entering a new phase in the Iran war. It seems like the military operations have declined in their tempo. The targeting has slowed down slightly. And we have this Strait of Hormuz crisis that may be getting worse, maybe getting better. There's some fog of war. But what have you been tracking on this story this week, Lomez?
Yeah, the big news to me was what happened yesterday when Iran struck these natural gas LNG facilities in Qatar and elsewhere, and seemed to project exactly the kind of force that from the sort of hawk position we were told, had been severely degraded and that they ought not to be able to do at this point. So, if I'm taking a kind of measure here of where we are in terms of whether or not the hawk version of this campaign is more likely to play out, or the dove version, which suggests, this sort of quagmire, this escalatory spiral, this stalemate that could end in some kind of, at best, ambiguous fashion. I have to say where I'm at right now, if I'm being totally honest, and this is not what I want, but, I have to just say what's in front of us here. I'm leaning in the sort of dove direction that, once again, like, if this were going as well as it ought to be, we should know by now, right? Or am I missing something?
I mean, I think, look, it's a war between a superpower and a major power. And so the idea that it could be resolved instantaneously, you drop a bomb on the Ayatollah's head, everything gets resolved, there's no significant retaliation or escalation. To me, that always seemed like something of a myth. If you're going to go in and try to topple a government that has ballistic missiles, it has a drone army, it has kind of street militias that have a tight grip over the country. The dove hypothesis and the hawk hypothesis, which we elaborated last week in our two interviews with Kurt Mills and Will Chamberlain, the best hawk case was that this would be wrapped up quickly with little economic or geopolitical cost. I still think that's possible. But there are drips of information that provide me with some anxiety and some unease.
Okay, wasn't the thesis, look, I'm going to take the panicking position here just because, it's important to kind of articulate all this stuff and stress test some of these assumptions we're making. I want this to work, of course, I want this to be successful. I have zero politically, from an ego standpoint, invested in this failing. I want this to work. However, wasn't it the case that we were told those initial strikes going through those first 2 weeks, here we are in the 19th day, we would have prevented them by then to be able to launch precisely the kinds of attacks they launched yesterday? In other words, they can still hit these critical infrastructural points across several different countries. They were antagonized into doing this by strikes from Israel. And we can get into whether or not we had a say in that, or that was Israel acting unilaterally, or what that was. But they were able to project a pretty significant amount of force. Is there any indication here that we'll be able to somehow prevent them from doing this? That we are maybe we're slowing down the rate of the strikes? But if they can hit critical infrastructure that could potentially shut down the entire global economy, isn't it the case that they hold the cards here? Okay, this is my panicking point of view. Talk me out of this.
I'm going to talk you deeper into it, actually.
Okay, perfect.
So if we take that logic a step further, the difference between this week and previous weeks is that week one for sure was focused on political leadership and military targets. But now we seem to have an escalating exchange against infrastructure. The Strait of Hormuz, natural gas facilities, Karg Island, which is where Iran processes and distributes most of its oil exports. And the threat calculus, or the balance of threat escalation, seems to be, we can take out some infrastructure, you can take out some infrastructure. And if the oil exports are disrupted, if the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, if the flow of this critical commodity is disrupted for a long enough time, that's going to have serious consequences for around the world. And look, American voters are pretty simple when it comes down to it. if oil is $6 a gallon,
Yeah.
if the price of groceries goes up, if there are anything resembling, gas lines in our future, which seems to be something that could possibly happen if Iran plays the game aggressively, it's game over for Republicans. And so the hawk position never fully kind of downplayed to a much kind of too great extent the geopolitical and economic risks of this strategy that I think are just starting to kind of peer over the horizon.
Okay, now the position, we don't have Will Chamberlain on today to provide a sort of counterpoint to this. But if you go back and listen to what he told us last week, it's, look, guys, okay, yeah, it's, 10 days into the war. Now we're 19 days into this war. It's still early days here. Yes, Iran can go strike at this natural gas facility. Yes, they are not completely degraded in what they can do from a military standpoint. But, it's just, again, it's just a matter of time. There's a plan here. Give it a couple of weeks. Are you still willing to give it a couple of weeks? Or are you let's just put you face to face with, Donald Trump, the Security Council. Imagine you're sitting at the table. Are you advising them, okay, it's time to cut bait here. It's time to figure out a way to sit down with the Iranians, whatever that leadership looks like at this point, strike some kind of deal where both sides can save face. And what might this look like? Iran can say that their regime is still in place. Iran can tell themselves the story that, look, we rebuffed what, the great Satan, USA and Israel were trying to do in terms of forcing our hand, and we held control of the Strait of Hormuz, and we've shown our strength to the international community. They can tell themselves that story. They can tell their people that story. On the other hand, we can tell ourselves a story that we did massively degrade their military capabilities. Their nuclear armament plans have been pushed back not just years or months, but basically decades, basically indefinitely. If we believe the Iranians can act rationally, big if, we might be able to strike some other deal where they just say, look, all right, we're done arming Hezbollah. We're done arming the Houthis. We're going to just kind of take our foot off the pedal here, and both sides walk away. Is that something we can accomplish right now? And would you advise us trying to accomplish that right now if we could?
I mean, I don't know. I think that imagine it in reverse. If Iran had dropped a bomb on our political leader, the president of the United States, killed him, killed all of our top military leaders, killed our council of experts who would select the next political leader, you're not going to have a huge willingness to negotiate. And of course, it's not a one-to-one comparison because we're the stronger power, Iran is the weaker power. And so they may have to negotiate from a position of weakness. But I don't think we're going to get real honest brokering here from what's left of the Iranian theocratic state. Like, why would they? And if we are now going to the table seeking some kind of bargain or accommodation, they will likely feel that they have won, that they have, that, the great Satan blinked.
Yeah.
And so, and then the second question is, even if you can get them to the table, it's not clear that they would want to even start this bargaining process. But let's say you get them there, can you trust them? A, and can they trust us? B, because a negotiation that works is one where there's at least a baseline of mutual trust. And so I think that these strikes, again, maybe history will prove that they were worthwhile because we achieved our military or geostrategic objectives. But I don't think that if we were to go into a negotiating strategy, that we would find much success there. It seems like once the bombs start dropping, the chances or possibilities of a productive negotiation start dwindling kind of almost in a one-to-one way. So I guess, after having thought about it this week, having really thought about the arguments from Mills, from Chamberlain, I still don't have a clear understanding. And I really tried to push Will on this, making a hawk case. What is our objective? And so if we're trying to optimize means, and what you're asking is a question of means, do we keep striking? Do we
Yep.
escalate? Do we de-escalate? Do we negotiate? Well, it depends, because it depends what we're trying to achieve at the back end. And I don't think the administration, even this week, has really offered a clear rationale and a clear set of conditions where we can say we've won.
I mean, I guess we're just trying to squeeze the Iranian regime into submission here and achieve more or less what we achieved with Venezuela. So let's just kind of reverse engineer from that campaign what might be the sort of end state objectives from this campaign. You now have a regime in power, even if on a superficial basis, nominally, they kind of look the same. It's just the next guy in line from the previous regime. They're acting fundamentally differently and according to a very different set of interests and incentives. And in the case of Venezuela, we can get them to do what we want, to act in our benefit. We are divorcing them from the influence of China, perhaps Russia. They are no longer providing fuel to Cuba. And we see the sort of domino effect happening in that case, which is once you sort of decapitate that regime that was in power and halting what might be progress elsewhere, suddenly all sorts of opportunities open up, and perhaps in unexpected ways. This would perhaps facilitate more trade, more freedom of movement in that Middle Eastern region. It would calm things down there. Perhaps. Okay, I don't know, but I'm speculating about what they might want this to look like. Basically, it is someone we can just negotiate with, someone we can bargain with, someone who will do what we want from that region. My concern, like you, is I just don't know that is going to be a quick or easy thing to do. The idea here, the premise here was, yeah, that would be good if we could get that, and it would be good if we could get that cheaply. But I don't know that second condition seems all that likely anymore. This is no longer cheap. And I mean, like, from a dollar standpoint, I mean, from a political domestic cost standpoint, from an international political cost standpoint, this is becoming rather costly in my point of view. And so I'm having to sort of now recalibrate the sort of risk reward calculus in this case. And it just needs to be addressed here. Okay. I was reading actually a statement from the Iranians this morning, in which they said, to my surprise, and can you trust them? I don't know. But what they said was, we don't want to do this. We don't want to strike these infrastructural facilities. But we had to in this case because we were struck by the Israelis and / the United States. And so we had to demonstrate that we would be willing to push back, that we would be willing and capable of counteracting those kind of infrastructural strikes. To me, that indicates a kind of rationality. They recognize what escalation looks like. They recognize their own existential crisis that they are in. They do recognize that they still have something to lose. There's something of value that they want to preserve. So, if that can be taken seriously, and again, these are big ifs, then yeah, okay, maybe there is an opportunity to go to the table here. The concern, of course, is we are also hamstrung in some sense, maybe not hamstrung, but we are also calibrating here or weighing or having to consider the interests of a partner here, Israel, that doesn't seem to share our identical interests. Some interests, but not identical interests.
Sure.
And it has to be asked, what does Israel want here? Does Israel want a failed state? Is Israel willing to escalate well beyond what we're willing to do? And if so, at what point does Trump kind of stomp on their interests and assert our supremacy here? So do you find this to be reaching a point of crisis or a point of decision where Trump is going to have to say, and he sort of did in this last statement, to the Israelis, no more of this, and kind of swat them down? And if so, what does that look like other than just strongly worded Truth Social posts?
Yeah, well, I mean, Trump has done so in the past, and I think if necessary, he would do so again, which is good. And I guess so to get to your first point though, the broader historical picture, and I did some reading this week just to try to build up some contextual awareness, and the comparison between Venezuela and Iran is really an important one. So I think they're different in fundamental ways, and I think we cannot expect the same outcome in Iran as in Venezuela because of these differences. So first off, the Venezuelans are a kind of a pastiche communist regime. It's really kind of narco thugs, criminal enterprise, and the number two, Delcy Rodriguez seems to be someone that is calculating, that is maybe criminal but rational, and that would do a deal with the United States. And there's also, I think, a greater sense of this is within our sphere of control. It's the Monroe Doctrine, the Donroe Doctrine. It's in our hemisphere. Venezuela, it's Cuba, it's other Latin American countries where we seem to have influence and have had influence in the past. Iran is a different contextual story, and I had kind of forgotten this, but in brushing up on the history, I had forgotten that Iran was not actually aligned with the kind of capitalist power or the communist power during the Cold War. Iran had its own kind of civilizational ideology that rejected both. So they were, against the kind of Soviet aggression in Afghanistan. They were against the perceived American aggression elsewhere in the Middle East. But they really had carved out their own revolutionary ideology, their own civilizational logic, and their own military deterrence, which was designed to really repel aggression from any angle. And it seems like, and again, I think in distinction with Venezuela, which seems very cynical, it seems like the Iranians, at least that leadership layer, are genuinely committed to the ideology.
Yeah.
You get the sense that these are people who are not kind of stupid, brutish thugs, but in many cases they're engineers, philosophy PhDs, clerics with religious education, and they're corrupt, they're brutal, they've committed evil against the United States. But you have to be honest that they actually believe what they're saying. And again, in huge distinction, what we've seen on the transition from Venezuela, it's going to the number two. She's sending signals. Yeah, let's make a deal. Iran, it's a different story. The number two is the son, of the deposed leader, who some speculate is injured or maybe seriously injured. And the reporting indicates, allegedly, that his wife and his child were killed in the initial round of airstrikes. And so if you have a radical cleric who has potentially personally faced injury and potentially, allegedly, lost his wife and child to American airstrikes, you're not going to get a reasonable negotiating partner. You're not going to get someone that is going to, make a deal. But in fact, you're going to get someone that is going to dig in deeper. And you hope that they could retain this rational military logic moving forward. But that doesn't seem to me, at least at this point in time, like an ideal outcome. It seems like a much worse outcome at much greater cost than what we saw in Venezuela.
50% of you listening right now aren't subscribed, so please do so. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, and sign up now so you don't miss any of our content. Yeah, and so, it's hard to argue with that logic. I see those same distinctions you do, and I don't think it's realistic to expect the same outcome as Venezuela. And to be fair to the people who are in support of this and have been vocal supporters of this, I don't think there's really ever been a suggestion that it's going to be precisely the same thing. But in the absence of that, precise one-to-one relationship between Venezuela and what we can expect out of Iran, I agree with you. There is some sort of lack of clear expectation that those of us who want to support this, want to see it be successful, can make some sense of the progress and understand, what this might look like. And I think, there's a couple of things here that I'm now also paying attention to. There's the one just sort of on its own terms. Is this a successful campaign vis-a-vis Iran? What happens to the Middle East, geopolitical strategy, and so on? There's the second question of the domestic political outcomes and implications of this. They're related, but they are different. And one thing domestically that I hope we can continue to see is that some of the economic fallout that is already starting to percolate elsewhere, like in Asia, in Europe, especially with this natural gas hit, we can insulate ourselves from because of our own energy independence, which is a great thing to have right now, but for us, but doesn't necessarily solve the geopolitical problem that might be arising here. So, okay, I feel like Odysseus lashed to the mast here. The siren call of the Panicans telling me to get off the ship and, abandon Trump and abandon the mission. And I don't want to be run aground on the rocky shores of, whatever the island is, Circe's Island, whatever the island is. Okay, I should know this, but is it Scylla? Is that okay? It doesn't matter.
Scylla and Charybdis. I don't know.
Scylla,
They're
all
Scylla,
right. We're in the Straits, okay?
Phrases.
And,
yeah,
and we gotta
phrases.
we gotta lash ourselves to the mast here, okay? And see this through. Because I'm starting to see people sort of abandon Trump over this. I think that's the wrong move. Whatever this amounts to, I will always be indebted to Trump. I think Trump, it was the singular figure who brought us out of this period of sort of stasis and terminal loss that not just the conservatives were in, the Republican Party was in, but as a country we were in. We were heading down this path of real sort of national capitulation almost. I mean, I don't think that's too strong a term. I think we really were losing track of who we were and what we were about. And of course, mass immigration was a huge piece of that. So all of that dwarfs whatever's happening here in Iran. And I do think there's some necessity here. Okay, again, I'm just going to use this metaphor to lash ourselves to the mast and just continue on trusting. But this would be a lot easier from the position of wanting to be honest about what's happening, having some platform where we can talk about this and communicate what is happening to a larger audience, that there was a clearer understanding of where we were going, what's happening, how to make sense of the progress of this campaign from the administration, from the spokespeople for that administration. So, that's something I'll be looking for as we get deeper and deeper into this. And I also want to remind ourselves last week, glibly, but not unseriously said, maybe this will be the 24-day war, okay? And we'll go in this progression, 6-day war, 12-day war, 24-day war. We're on day 19.
5 days to go, yeah.
I'm just
it's possible, and we shouldn't panic. There's really no reason to panic. That's not helpful. But I think it is important to honestly assess where we feel, we think, we observe, we are at the moment. And if the administration seems to be straying from its principles or from the most productive action, to provide not a hysterical critique or to throw in the towel or to make some big display, burn your MAGA hat. We should have never trusted, Epstein's guy. There's all these ridiculous displays, and they'll come crawling back if things change.
Right.
We're of course not going to do that on this show. But I think, look, the administration is sensitive to public opinion, and if people provide a critique, if they sense that public opinion is slipping beyond the kind of danger zone, they will change course. And one of Trump's actually great traits is that he will turn on a dime if he feels like it's necessary, with no hint of anxiety, with no hint of embarrassment, with no hint of hesitation. He'll just say, this is the new thing, and people will follow. And so I think that we'll see that happening. But I want to switch gears. And one person who did jump ship in a very splashy way was my fellow Washington State resident, Joe Kent. And so Joe Kent was a decorated Green Beret, served 11 tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and elsewhere in the global war on terror. He looks like Superman, which I think is very helpful for his image. He lost his first wife in Syria. She was doing some military work there. He joined the administration in the kind of Tulsi Gabbard, non-interventionist clique. And now he's exited and penned a resignation letter that basically said, and tell me if I'm being too strong, the administration has been captured by Israel. I'm resigning in protest.
No, I think that's a totally accurate and fair summary of what the letter was. And it's a fair representation based on this long interview he had with Tucker last night. Not sure if you've seen it yet, but where he goes into some further detail about it, but basically just recapitulates exactly what you just said. This is not a war being waged by Donald Trump or the United States, or really based on their independently arrived at conclusions about what needs to be done vis-a-vis the Middle East, but because of certain kind of manipulations. And again, this is something where I asked Kurt Mills to kind of spell out for us, because he had a similar critique, of course. And it's like, all right, what is the mechanism? How is this happening? Where is this influence coming from? How is it exercised on decision makers in the United States government? And I think, as with Kurt, Joe is a little less than specific, a little less than precise about that. It's just a kind of vague understanding. Now, that doesn't mean it's not real, but I am waiting for someone to sort of explain specifically. And, for various reasons, I think a lot of people who make this accusation kind of dance around the fact. They'll just sort of point to evidence here, evidence there, or this coincidence here, this coincidence there, this person over there, and just let you sort of put those pieces together. So let's just have it out. If we're going to have this argument, if we're going to have this debate, we can't be dancing around it. And let's stay on this for just a second, and then get back to Joe Kent more broadly, because this is less about Joe Kent specifically and more about the whole conversation. Because the other thing Joe Kent also indicated in this interview with Tucker was that there's some relationship here to Charlie Kirk and Charlie Kirk's assassination. Okay,
yeah, I know.
And it's but no, this is super important because it's all coming from the same intuition, hunch, set of sort of circumstantial evidence that gives rise to the first claim, which is there's this undue influence from Israel and Israeli actors, and then the more scandalous claim, which is that this somehow explains Charlie Kirk's murder, and somehow also explains, because he didn't stop there, what happened in Butler, okay, with Donald Trump. All right, if we're going to have this conversation, and you're the director of counterintelligence. What's his precise title?
Counterterrorism.
Yeah, counterterrorism, not counterintelligence. Counterterrorism. Thank you. And I understand there's certain sensitivities.
And in that role, if indeed he suspected some foreign involvement in these two events, would be within his purview, because attempting to assassinate the president, attempting to assassinate a prominent political activist, is an act of terrorism, right?
Yeah.
So but anyways, I'll let you finish.
Look, man,
I'm getting all hopped up.
I actually have a very strong attitude towards Joe Kent. Okay. My perception of him just, 5 days ago, you asked me about Joe Kent. Yeah, man, straight up.
Love Joe Kent.
No nonsense guy, honest broker. This is a guy who you can count on. Okay. So it doesn't automatically then stand to reason that I can just hand wave away anything he says because it sounds crazy to me or something, or it doesn't meet my intuitions on the outside. But then I would, I want to then say, okay, you're going to make those kinds of insinuations. This is not light stuff.
No,
it's one thing for the podcasters to be like, look, I'm just asking questions. I saw this thing over here, and then I heard this rumor over there. And look, I'm not saying anything. I don't have any evidence. I don't have any reason to suspect it was anything other than Tyler Robinson, this guy, Discord tranny, who is obviously motivated by this leftist ideology, whose fingerprints were on the weapon, whose own parents turned him in, and every piece of physical evidence point to as the culprit of this crime. Okay. It wasn't him, it was something else. And I'm just asking questions. No, I'm sorry. Like at this stage, if we're going to have this kind of serious adult conversation, you want to be a brave truth teller, let's have it out. What do you know? What do you know? And one thing I'm finding very dissatisfying about this whole sort of conversation is this unwillingness to just say the thing. Just say what it is you're insinuating. And there's never this moment. And, I get it. It's sensitive. There are maybe certain things Joe can't talk about, but he's gone pretty far already over the line. I mean, he's quit the administration to tell the American public what's actually going on behind the scenes. Don't stop here. I mean, you've already inched your way in. Like, tell us what's going on. That's one thing that I want to see, and we're not getting.
For years, the most influential platforms in America have been hostile to Christian values, to family, and the moral framework that built Western civilization in the first place. And the right's biggest mistake, pretending that neutrality was still possible. It's not, and that's why Blaze TV matters.
Blaze TV isn't just a content platform. It's part of a broader effort to build parallel institutions rooted in faith, truth, and civilizational sanity. It's a Christian, faith-based company that understands culture, shapes politics, and understands that the media is one of the primary battlegrounds. When you subscribe, you're doing more than just unlocking our content.
Because if we do not build our own platforms, we'll always be at the mercy of people who despise our values. So if you want to participate in this great project and get involved with Blaze TV, go to blazetv.com, subscribe today, use the promo code Rufo to save $20 on your annual subscription. That's promo code Rufo, R-U-F-O, to save $20 on your annual subscription. Yeah, so and let me give the full disclosure. So I've known Joe Kent for a number of years. When he was running for Congress down in the southern part of the state, kind of around Vancouver, Washington, I went down and did an event with him. We talked about, this was during the critical race theory days. We had a great event, got to know him, got to shake his hand, endorsed his campaign, really liked him, of course, admired his military service. I mean, these guys, and I know a number of them, the kind of Ranger Regiment, Navy, I mean, these special operators are superhuman. What they do is incredible. It requires courage, bravery, strength, all of the kind of martial virtues. And so really admired him. But, and look, and when the statement came out, I said, all right, this is a serious person. This is what I think to be a good man. Loves his country. Let's hear it out.
He's earned the right to be taken seriously.
He's earned the right to be taken seriously. But there's two problems, and both of which you're kind of opening the conversation about. The first problem was in the statement itself. If he had said, based on my inside knowledge, based on the facts that I've observed within the administration, we're not pursuing this war in our interest. We're pursuing this war for these other reasons. I would have said, okay, let's hear out the evidence. Let's hear out the facts. Let's hear out your argument at length. But he went a number of steps further, even in that letter, where he said, also, the Israelis were the reason we got into the Iraq war. Also, the Israelis were the reason we got into the war in Syria, which where my wife died. And then on the podcast, also the Israelis might have been involved in Charlie Kirk's assassination. I mean, we're getting away from carefully reasoned whistleblower testimony about the facts that have been shielded from the public to just general purpose kind of podcast schizo land. And I don't want to believe it because I like Joe Kent. But if you're going to make those kind of accusations, you need to come with some serious facts. And look, I just do not take seriously anybody that suggests that the Israelis assassinated Charlie Kirk because he was the last person holding back Trump from striking Iran militarily. Look, I knew Charlie Kirk. You knew Charlie Kirk. I think Charlie Kirk was the single best organizer, fundraiser, youth movement leader in America on either side.
The last right winger under 40 who actually liked Israel. Okay.
Yes. Also, generally pro-Israel, but the idea that he was the man that was stopped. I mean, it's farcical. It's ridiculous. And while I think, look, someone dies, you want to see only the best in them. You want to, make sure that people see the legacy. Let's not get to the point where it's just delusional. The idea that Charlie Kirk had such personal sway over the military destiny of the United States, it's not true. So the premise of this is not true. And the idea that the Israelis would assassinate an American political figure, which would be existential risk for them, because that was worth it in their calculation to pursue this. It's this is not even believable as a screenplay. If you were to submit a screenplay to me and this was the plot, I would say, we're getting way beyond believability. And so as soon as Joe Ken is going into that territory, I'm hitting the button. I'm out.
Okay. But all right, Chris, I mean, I share your frustrations with the way these conversations are unfolding because of this lack of willingness to stand by these claims in a full-throated way and present evidence that is convincing rather than just these vague insinuations and then retreat to, I don't know, but I'm just asking questions.
You can't do it.
I find that unsatisfying, epistemically. That is not something we can hang our hats on and then make decisions around, because it's still just in this sort of vague speculative space. We need to, this is serious. This has tremendous gravity, and it ought to be known. And if Joe Kent has something to say, I really want to hear him say it. The fact that he's not saying it suggests to me that, well, I don't know, that it is just this sort of vague, speculative, kind of non-space. It's just there might not be much there other than his own hunches. And so what explains this?
But the hunches are informed by what? There's no evidence that the hunt, and that's the question that he should have answered. Hey, listen, buddy, you're exiting the administration in the splashiest way possible. You get one bite at the apple. You've got to make your case. And you had 2 hours on Tucker to make it.
Yeah.
And from my observation, from my vantage point, he didn't make clear that he was basing these hunches, intuitions, suspicions on things that he saw at the center of the American intelligence apparatus. They sounded a lot like a Candace Owens, a Nick Fuentes, in kind of other kind of podcast conspiracies. And to me, that's just a disservice. And it's kind of, you're committing, in essence, a kind of public suicide of your reputation when you make extremely serious allegations.
Well,
and a foreign ally might have assassinated an American citizen to achieve its political objectives.
Yeah.
Dude, you cannot, if you're running an intelligence agency, that shows such shockingly bad judgment. It really, to me, calls into question the basic, the basic believability, but also the basic capability of doing the job.
I mean, there was a moment in the interview with Tucker where he implied, that the counterterrorism investigation that was being undergone simultaneous to the criminal investigation the FBI was doing on the Charlie Kirk assassination was halted, was put to a stop before they could pursue various lines of inquiry. And the secondary suggestion beyond that was that this pointed in the direction of Israel. Okay. I don't think, drawing conclusions from that interview that weren't present in the way that the information was conveyed, right? I mean, isn't that how you read that? And
I think that's what they were implying. Yes.
And then Tucker asked him to sort of follow up on that, or I don't know if Tucker asked him to follow up, but can at least realize, okay, this demands then some kind of clarity. You got to be more specific here. And he just said, look, it's a counterterrorism investigation. There are certain things I can't say. Okay. And that was his out. That was his way of removing himself from the obligation, in my view, to say what it is that gave him this impression that there was some rock left to be unturned or left to be turned over that would explain to everybody, that would demonstrate to everybody this really scandalous and sort of historically important fact about what's going on at the highest levels of our government and intelligence communities. I mean, this is really explosive stuff. Okay, so I'm having a hard time squaring that.
But you have to do the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers worked in exposing, malfeasance at the heart of government and the policymaking process, the war, because they brought the evidence.
Yes.
Insinuation on a podcast is not sufficient. And there are models previously. And again, whatever you think about Pentagon Papers or WikiLeaks or Bradley Manning, what they did was put themselves on the line to expose what they believed was a grave injustice that was being held secret by the government. And then you let it out there. But to basically, insinuate on a podcast leaves me feeling like either you have no evidence and you're just joining the kind of podcast collective, this kind of schizo break, or you have the evidence, but you're not willing to take it all the way. In both cases, you shouldn't do it. Just say, look, I'm not willing to go all the way. I'm just out, and I'll go back to being a private citizen and go to the grave with it.
It's a really strange situation, I have to say, because I can't square this analysis with the impression I had of this guy, going into this event. And that is creating some sort of dissonance. Okay. Like, how do you square this? And also, though, things that Joe Kent said previously that run in direct, both about Israel and about our war and about our relative to position towards Iran and what should be done about Iran. All of that is in contradiction to what he's saying now. And,
it's bizarre.
I don't want to just sit here and go, well, okay, this is another guy who's sort of been taken in by a certain kind of sort of hysteria or something. That doesn't seem fair, but there's got to be some explanation here. There's got to be some articulation of the specific thing, and I don't see it. And okay, let's have it out too. This what was also reported last night that he's under FBI investigation for leaking. I mean, man, it's such a bad situation. What do you think that has anything to do with this? Are we reading too much into it? Is it incidental? Like, what do you make of all this?
Great question. And let's close out the hour. Let's stick with this and really follow to the conclusion, because what you're bringing up is an important part of the story that I think we need to cover. These are all proxies in a fight between the Hawk faction and the Dove faction. That's what's happening here. And so what we've seen is that Trump during the campaign was trying to create this umbrella coalition where you'd have people like Lindsey Graham and other hawks that were, joining the administration or influential with the administration, the Israelis, of course. And then you'd have people like Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Kent and Dan Caldwell and, the kind of Tucker Carlson wing of the party, and also the podcast wing of the party. Because remember, the Joe Rogan, the Tim Dillon, the goofy guy from Louisiana, what's his name?
That's good enough.
You know what I'm talking about. So the podcast wing, and the idea was to bring them all
Theo
in.
Von.
And Trump, yes, Theo Von, and they would all be part of this coalition. Well, it's very clear what's happening now. The podcast wing, the podcasters have jumped ship. The Iran war is a big reason they're now kind of turned against the administration. And then more importantly, within the administration, there is, I think we can say accurately, a hawk or neoconservative purge of the anti-interventionist faction. And so they're being downgraded. They're being, kind of uninvited from the meetings, or in the case of Joe Kent, they're being pushed out. And investigated for leaking. And these are proxy fights that really matter. And my sense of the state of play right now is that, look, Lindsey Graham is very happy. He's smiling. He's happy. He's overjoyed. He's, kind of railing against the Ayatollah. And the folks on the other side are out of power, out of office, under investigation, and now, kind of sharing their sour grapes. Is this consistent with how you see it, or do you see it?
Yeah, not only is that's fine, that's consistent, and I think that's how coalitional politics work. I mean, people have their different points of view, and the coalitions sort of scramble and do this tug of war for influence over the decision makers, and sometimes you get what you want, sometimes you don't, and as sort of the administration kind of moves forward and evolves, it is just the case that this certain faction has become dominant over the other. If that was the only story, then I don't think there'd be as much to talk about here, or it wouldn't be quite so explosive, quite so scandalous. This is ordinary politics. Where this is getting all gunked up and difficult to discuss, and where, some of these factions are starting to get accusatory is, well, this isn't about the United States. This isn't about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is just this kind of floating signifier who actually does. And even if you listen to Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson last night, they don't assign agency to Donald Trump. Okay. Yeah. Donald Trump's not making decisions. Donald Trump is just
to Donald Trump. They're saying Trump is great,
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's this kind of thing that exists, and he's just a vehicle.
That is at the mercy of the physics of the social reality around him.
Right. He's just right. And there's this influence campaign, not just from Lindsey Graham, although Lindsey Graham's a part of it, not just from, people inside the administration who have a more hawkish disposition. It's from Israel. It's from a foreign state actor. And on the other side, what is being accused or insinuated is that these podcasters and so on, if that's what we want to call them for shorthand, I guess we should just say, though, non-interventionists. That's sure. I think actually what they are, because it also is inclusive of like AmCon and this sort of PaleoCon wing.
Sure.
That is not incidental to the coalition, and that they're being influenced by, okay, pick your country, Russia, Qatar, some other, maybe right. Iran themselves.
Iran and Russia, China. Right? The most bad faith accusations is you're a tool of Iran and Russia. The IRCG, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is sending the talking points to Kurt Mills. I saw somebody say that, which is obviously ridiculous.
But Chris, this is interesting because while I think it's now been debunked in some sense, Tucker Carlson, whether that was Friday night or some point over the weekend, had this announcement that he made that his text messages were being intercepted by the CIA and that he was talking to the Iranians, and this was potentially going to get him in trouble. And he claimed, okay, but it's because I'm a journalist and I'm doing this sort of fact finding or whatever. And what we learned, I think, according to reporting on it, was that this doesn't exist. Okay, make of that what you will.
Wait, what do you mean it doesn't exist? I didn't see this.
Well, there is no investigation. That Tucker Carlson has heard from some source that he's being investigated, but that source is just wrong. This isn't real. That this is part of the sort of hysteria or paranoia that Tucker is undergoing. That's what the claim is. And Tucker hasn't pursued this any further than that one claim. But the fact that Tucker is revealing publicly that he's having these ongoing conversations with Iran, I mean, doesn't that feed fuel to this fire? And what I'd ask you is,
that's fair. That's
fair.
Are
you convinced that there are no foreign state actors involved in this, either from the Israel side or from this other collection of adversarial forces who want to press on the non-interventionists in some way? Do you find that all just baseless accusation?
No, not at all. But here's my view, and it's an important distinction. So, look, we know that the Israelis have a foreign policy objective. We know they're highly connected with the administration. They're a great ally in many ways, but they also try to influence the public policy. That's natural. That's like the point of having a sovereign state, is you try to do what's the interest of your state. So that's shouldn't be controversial. We also know that the Qataris in particular, I mean, look, even in my alma mater at Georgetown, the Qataris were pouring unbelievable sums of money into their Center for Islamic Faith and Study of Civilization. They are one of the biggest funders in American universities from overseas. We also know that, of course, the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese all have influence operations that are active to try to push things in their way. And so we don't discount that. But I think it's also, we should not consider them as all-encompassing and creating a sense of inevitability, that there is a direct one-to-one input to output relationship, that the Qataris spend $10 billion trying to influence things, and therefore they get what they want. And all of the intermediary actors, including the president of the United States, are essentially in a kind of market where the policy decision goes to the highest bidder. Does it have influence? Obviously, it does. Otherwise, these countries wouldn't do it. But is it determinative? Is it deterministic even? I don't think that's true. And especially with President Trump. Look at President Trump's rhetoric on Iran dating back to the 1980s.
Yes.
So over like 40 years, he's consistently said, we got to get Iran. We got to blow up their oil fields. We got to get the Ayatollah. We got to shoot them with missiles. And so the idea that Trump, who is probably one of the most individualistic and strong-willed personalities in 21st century America, the idea that he's being easily manipulated and led around by the nose, I don't think is true. And the idea that non-interventionist critics or interventionist critics are only doing so purely out of cynical benefit from foreign lobbies also, is not my experience. And in fact, people often are very idealistic and they have real beliefs.
Yes.
And have some been corrupted? And of course, I'm sure. But I don't think you can assume that. I think that's actually doing a discredit to the debate and really kind of thinking too poorly of real people with real, authentic, and genuine beliefs.
I mean, I agree with that. I certainly agree with the point about Trump. Trump does have agency, and I think it's totally disingenuous. I shouldn't say disingenuous. I think it's just wrong. I think it's false to refuse to ascribe the motivations for these actions to Trump himself. Trump wants to do this, and that's why it's happening. Now, you can take issue with that, but you're taking issue with Trump. You're not taking issue then with just some collection of like background forces that are pressing on him against his will or manipulating him as some kind of like Manchurian president.
It's the same argument as critical race theory, systemic racism.
Yeah.
The critics, the kind of podcast critics, are essentially accusing the American government of being the unwitting victim of systemic Zionism. Yeah. You can't point to it. You can't create a causal chain. Nobody quite has agency. It's just this osmosis or ambient kind of Zionism or malevolent influence that because the actions occur, it's therefore the cause. And look, if you're making, I don't have any problem with people making the argument. Make the argument, fine. But if you're going to make the argument, and then you're going to go even beyond that to kind of the crazy land with Charlie Kirk and Butler and all these things, you have to bring the evidence in a systematic and persuasive way.
Okay, but if we're going to stay on that metaphor, like with critical race theory, while the mechanisms are opaque and the ones that are described by the theorists are kind of sort of clumsily articulated and don't sort of add up on their own terms to explain the effects that they're observing. The effects that they're observing are in some sense real. So in other words, it is the case that there's like a black-white test score difference, and or there's differences in like criminality or prison rates, or in for example, like income levels. The things they're describing do exist. Okay. You can't just say, no, none of that's real.
Correct.
And likewise, if you look at the environment of, United States foreign policy and some of our actions vis-a-vis Israel, you can't say, no, it's not the case at all that what you're observing is not real, that there has been a special relationship with this relatively small country that seems to advance their interests in ways that doesn't apply to other countries. So in other words, like in realist theory, you wouldn't ever want to encourage some foreign state actor to become a regional hegemon. Rather, what we want to do is deter countries from becoming regional hegemons. It's in our interest to make sure that Israel doesn't control the Middle East. But our actions actually run counter to that hard realist theory. And so you have to say, okay, well, why? Why in this case are we less reluctant to sort of deter or prevent Israel from becoming a regional hegemon? And so, okay, I'm not saying necessarily there's some grand design or weird theory behind that suggesting the Israeli, a literal Zog conspiracy, which is what we're getting to. Okay, what we're getting to, and what people just
are
they're just saying we have
people
Zog,
at high level administration. It's crazy.
That's just what we're saying. So so go ahead.
So let me explain why, just like the theory of systemic racism is wrong, the theory of systemic Zionism or Zionist occupied government is wrong, because they're actually wrong in the same way. Your challenge was important, and you bring up an important point. The answer is not to say that in the case of systemic racism, that racism doesn't exist. The answer in the case of the kind of Israel question is not to say that the Israelis don't want to have an influence over foreign policy. The problem in both of these analyses is that you're taking a kernel of truth that might represent a fraction of the causal chain that describes the progression over historical reality, and you're blowing it up into a single, univariate, all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent,
also non-falsifiable,
non-falsifiable hegemon over reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's saying racism can describe everything. Whiteness is the evil power that animates all social structures and all social outcomes. And the same way, Israel is the evil, scheming power that describes, the arrangement of finance, of media, of the world itself. And Trump is a mere pawn. It's like it becomes an obsession. It becomes a sickness. It becomes totally detached from a carefully argued reality where you could say, hey, the influence of this foreign policy relationship represents this fraction of the causal chain that has led us here. And look, there's some truth to that, right? But in both cases, I think these theories are wrong. And in both cases, these theories activate a psychology of inferiority. So
of non-agency.
And non-agency, because this is the really important thing, is if you're, say, a Black American and you say, I believe in this theory. I have no agency over my life. My own efforts are not correlated with my outcomes. I am essentially just at the mercy of the white man. Is the same way for America, which, by the way, is a superpower, is the most powerful nation with the most global agency ever, debatably, in human history. To say, no, we're at the mercy of we're at the mercy of a state with, fewer than 10 million, the size of Washington State, fewer than 10 million people. It's denying agency in our country, in our president, in ourselves. And what I've noticed with people who entertain the kind of Zog-style conspiracy is that even at a kind of personal psychological level, they have a feeling that they cannot, much in the same way as with systemic racism, that they cannot imagine a world where they can succeed even. And I think it's a compensation. I think it's a projection. I think it's a big problem.
Yeah. Okay.
And let me give you the last word before we.
Well, no, I mean,
there's
there's a lot more to talk about with this, and we could go on and on all day, and I'm sure we're going to. Although, let me end with this: can we please go one podcast? And I don't know when this might be, maybe months from now, maybe, 5 years from now, where we don't say the word Israel.
Please.
And we don't talk about Iran, and we could just, have a normal country, a normal conversation.
What is your ideal amount of time spent thinking about Israel and the Jews? What is your ideal as a percentage? How much is in Lomez world? I'd like to be thinking about this issue. How much of the time?
It's a good question. The problem is either I answer one way, because I'm Jewish, I say none because I don't want anybody talking about it. Or I say, this is really important. We should be talking about it a lot because I have this ethno-narcissistic obsession. It's really a lose-lose situation for me.
It's tough for you.
So I should just say look, what I want to say is actually, and some amount of seriousness, that this is a topic that is now animating discussion among people on the right within the coalition to which I belong. In order for me to pursue the sort of political objectives that I want to pursue, which is domestically oriented, which is immigration first and last, truthfully, with some other secondary and tertiary priorities. This is now something that has to be addressed. It has to be discussed. We have to, take stock of this. I think it is a mistake just to ignore it and just say that these people are crazy or whatever, and just say, oh, Joe Kent, he's lost his mind. That's much too facile. That's not going to convince anyone. That is not going to be how we sort of win the day. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you do just ignore it. I don't know. So
it's too late for that.
It's too late for that. Cordon sanitaire, we've broken containment here. So we gotta just have it out. We gotta have out these conversations. And as long as it's the topic of conversation that, millions of people are paying attention to, I guess we need to too. Although, okay, we gotta spend just 2 minutes on this though. I did see today, there was some poll that came out, another one of these polls about Republican point of view with regards to this war. And it was something like 84% support, general Republican support. This is not MAGA affiliated. Is just general Republican support, 84%. 6% support the Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly point of view. Okay.
Isn't that amazing?
So what is that? What does that all entail here? Are we just trapped in some kind of, again, this algorithmic valley that consists of a couple 100,000 people, and that's it? I don't know, but just take that data point for what it is.
But I think it's just a factor of Trump.
Yeah.
MAGA voters love Trump. Whatever Trump says, they agree with. But I think the more high resolution, high fidelity polling that is segregated by age shows changing attitudes even among conservatives, not for the Iran war as a kind of contemporary conflict, but attitudes towards Israel, attitude towards Jews. And so that I think is worth talking about. And look, I'm going to give you a number. I'm going to actually just make it simple quota. If Jews are 2% of the population, let's just talk about them 2% of the time. I feel like it's good for Jews. It's good for America. It's good for me.
That's not going to happen,
good for
man.
Lomez. It's good for Lomez.
It's not going to happen because the truth is, and I'll tell you why, Jews don't have 2% of the influence.
I know. Well,
again, it's we got to be realistic. That is an observable, real reality.
Then let's do a quota to the percentage of Jews in the incoming class at Harvard. So we'll
what is that?
That will be how much.
Know.
I think it's 7% now. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
is that okay? All right.
Used to be 25. But
all right.
Let's get somewhere in there. That's a healthier balance.
All right, I'll come back next week. My more precise percentage. I'm going to have to take this back to my handlers, and so they can tell me exactly what I need to say on this topic.
Okay. Until next time.
All right. See you, Chris.